Hi, this is Rebecca. Today I want to talk to you about this book, Outwitting the Devil, written by Napoleon Hill, the man who wrote Think and Grow Rich. And this book was actually unpublished for 72 years. He wrote it back in 1938, and it only came out a few years ago. That's because the family refused to let him publish it. They knew it would be so controversial that it could ruin them. So it didn't get published until just a few years ago. So here we are, and it's an amazing book. I highly, highly recommend it. Some people have told me it is like the #1 book they've ever read. And I want to just give you some of the highlights that are in chapter 1. You know, as you know, if you've read Think and Grow Rich, he was commissioned by Andrew Carnegie to go out and study the lives of very, very successful people and find out what the secret to their success was. Not only did he study 500 successful people, but he studied 2,500 failures, because it was just as important to study the failures to find out what went wrong as it was to study the successes. And what he learned was that there was this intangible thing that all the successful people had that they had discovered. He calls it the other self. And it took him on quite a journey to discover his other self. A lot of pain was involved, and that's usually the case living in this three-dimensional world. It's difficult for us to tap into the other self until we have something happening in our lives that is putting us in a situation where we have nowhere else to turn, and then we find it. And what happened to him was he had to go into hiding for a year because an associate that he had was murdered by the mob. This was back in the days of Prohibition. He got a phone call and they threatened him. They said, if you don't get out of here, Canton, Ohio, within 30 minutes, you'll be going out in a pine box. So he quickly left and went to stay with relatives that were hidden away in the hills somewhere, lived in their basement for a year. But he got into a very, very bad state mentally. He became fearful. He was completely paranoid. If he ever went out in the daytime, he carried a gun with his finger on the trigger. He got very, very despondent, and he had too much idle time. He found out that if you're idle for too long and you're living in fear, it can really affect your mental health. So finally, they were arrested. He was able to leave, but he had no money. This was a very desperate time for him. He went for a long walk in the country, and he actually heard a voice that told him it was his other self. And Napoleon needed $25,000 to publish his book, which he had spent years writing. He had no money. The voice told him to go to Philadelphia immediately. And it told him to go to his brother-in-law and borrow $50 for the trip, and he would give it to him. The voice was so commanding that he couldn't refuse it. He knew that he was being given orders that he needed to obey. I don't know if you've ever heard that voice. I've heard it a few times in my life, and it does tell you what to do, and it is always right, as far as I've experienced. But it was right for Napoleon because he went to his brother-in-law, asked him for $50. The man gave him the money, and he even offered to give him $100 for the trip. He told him he was going to Philadelphia. And Napoleon said, no, I only need $50. He got to Philadelphia. He was going to rent a room in a rooming house for $1 a night. The voice told him, no, you go to the most expensive hotel in town and you rent the suite. And he did. And he really was kind of blown away, I think, because he didn't have very much money with himself, but he was willing to follow the guidance of this voice. It was so commanding. And then the voice told him to think of everyone he knew that could possibly loan him a $25,000 loan to publish his book. And the voice said, when you think of the right person, you will know. He did walk out of Philadelphia with $25,000. ready to publish his book. And it's an amazing story. I mean, you could say he had a spiritual awakening. He definitely had a very transformational experience. He was guided. I just want to share with you a quick story about how it happened to me once, a few times. I'm sure it's happened to all of you because we all live in this three-dimensional world of contrast. And we have periods where things are going along just swimmingly, and then other times we seem to hit rock bottom. One day I was living in Gramercy Park, New York, by myself with my little dog, and I was divorced. And I woke up one morning and I really didn't know what to do next. It just didn't seem right to be living in New York anymore. I was sort of burnt out on it. And I was a flight attendant, and so I had a job, but I just had no reason to be there. And I kind of just let go and felt very empty inside, like a vacuum. And I heard this voice. This male voice said to me, "You are leaving New York the beginning of March." Well, it was April. No, it was February. And I called my landlord down in Florida that I was renting from. I said, "Stephen, do you suppose I could break my lease and leave this apartment?" I had a year's lease. He said, "No, you can't leave. You signed a contract and you need to stay." I really didn't care that much one way or another. It was just that this voice had told me I'd be leaving New York. So I said, "Okay." Well, I got a phone call from him a few days later. He said, "Rebecca, you're not going to believe this, but you're going to have to move out of that apartment the beginning of March because the building is going co-op." He was renting the apartment, and come to find out, I was like an illegal sublet tenant that he was doing under the table. And in order for him to buy the place, which he wanted to do because he could get it at a very good price, he needed me to leave. It needed to be vacated. And so I left the beginning of March. And I moved to Boston and started a whole new life. And that voice knew exactly that I would be leaving New York at that time. So just like Napoleon Hill was guided throughout his life to bring his amazing works into the world, once we learn how to listen to that voice, things start to happen, and we do get the guidance we need. We just have to believe with faith that that voice is there. And if we can learn how to listen, we can hear it more frequently. Hi, this is Rebecca at RebeccaTripp.com. And today I'm talking about chapter 2 of Outwitting the Devil, written by Napoleon Hill. It's called A New World is Revealed to Me. In chapter 1, he talked about how he met his other self when he had completely bottomed out. He had nowhere to turn, and his higher self kicked in, his other self, he called it, and it told him exactly what to do. Go to Philadelphia. Told him how to get there. Borrow money from your brother-in-law. He did that. So in chapter 2, he explains how the other self told him to go through the list of every person he could think of who could possibly loan him the money he needed to publish his book, Think and Grow Rich. He needed $25,000. He spent 2 days going over every name, 300 people, and everyone he touched on, the answer was no from the other self. So he finally sat down in exhaustion in his chair and took a little doze. And he said it was like there was an explosion in the room. All of a sudden, the name of a man came into his thought that he had done some business with. The man had been an advertiser for his magazine that he had published previously. And it was someone he hadn't been thinking about, but he immediately sent him a letter with a proposal. And the man contacted him the very next day, came to Philadelphia. He showed him the manuscript for his book, told him he needed funding to publish it. And the man just thumbed through it a little bit, didn't read it at all, looked off into the distance, and came back and said, I'll publish your book. And he did. And that's how the other self operates sometimes. It will find the solution to the problem. I'll give you an example of one that happened to me once. I was living in a condo in Boston that I had purchased, and there was a terrible pilot strike looming. You know, I was a flight attendant, and this strike was supposedly going to be epic. And I'd even had a dream about it. And I saw this terrible battle going on between the pilots and management. And I really felt 100% it was going to happen. And I was concerned because I didn't really have the resources to sit out a long strike and pay my bills. I needed to pay my mortgage and live. And I knew that my income would be shut down. So I was tossing and turning every night for a few nights, trying to figure out what to do. And then all of a sudden, it was like the light went on in my consciousness. And I realized that even though I'd only owned this condo for about a year, it had gone up considerably in value, and I had equity in it. So I went and got an equity line of credit for $20,000, which I knew would be enough to cover me for quite a while. And I was as calm as could be. And this is the thing about the higher self, the other self that Napoleon Hill talks about. Your only limitation is the one which you set up in your own mind. And there is always, always a solution. It doesn't matter how big the problem is. There is always a solution. He goes on in this chapter to talk about all the men that he interviewed who were very successful had always, always been tested. They had to go through struggles, adversity, and overcome them in order to bring what their gift or their incredible idea or invention was into the world. People like Edison, Ford, Carnegie, they all had to overcome adversity in order to manifest what their greatest desire was, their burning desire, and their purpose. And they were able to do that. So he found out through his own personal experience that higher intelligence, this infinite intelligence that we're part of, sets up these little obstacles almost for us to overcome in order to prove that we're truly committed. Because when we overcome the obstacles that are thrown in our path and we keep going, doors open, people show up, the things that we need show up. Adversity is God's opportunity. So this chapter is a pretty powerful one because he goes on to explain how he started to pray differently after he had this particular lesson from his other self, showing him that if he listened to this guidance, he got what he needed in the form of the resources. And he wanted to publish his book on success principles so that he could reach people all over the world that were suffering from not knowing how to apply the principles of success in their own lives. And of course, this was the time of, they'd had a Great Depression. And there were many people struggling, trying to figure out how to reinvent themselves, how to find success in their lives again. He knew that the need was there, and his desire was to help mankind. So the more you're wanting to help people on the planet and do positive things, your higher self will find ways to make it happen. He also learned that he started to pray differently. Instead of begging and asking for things when difficult times came, he started to express gratitude every single day for everything that he had. He had a body that was functioning perfectly. He was able to think properly in order to bring his message into the world. He had a family. He had things that he was very happy about, and he gave gratitude for that. And that feeling of gratitude on a daily basis, he found, put him more in contact with infinite intelligence, which was able to bring him exactly what he needed when he needed it. The message in this book is so powerful, and I invite you to read it. It's a really good one. Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Hi, this is Rebecca at RebeccaTripp.com. And today I'm talking about the third chapter in that amazing book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. It's called A Strange Interview with the Devil. This is where Napoleon starts actually having a conversation with what appears to be the devil. He doesn't know if it's an entity or if it's his imagination, but the dialogue is pretty interesting. He had just gone through the Great Depression. He lost everything. A 600-acre estate. His bank folded. He lost all of his money. He was destitute, basically, like so many others. It was a global depression. And he had just finished interviewing over 500 successful people who told him their secrets to success. And he had learned that there are certain principles that guide successful people that they live by. Well, when he was in this situation of, having lost everything, he actually went into a depression because he didn't know in his core if he was going to be able to reinvent himself. And he was also really questioning whether or not his teachings that he had come up with were practical or if they were just mere theories, because he realized now he was going to be tested. And that's what happens. We ultimately have to put our money where our mouth is and find out if what we think we believe is real or if we're just imagining it. And that's where he was at. He was being tested. So, as I said, he was a bit depressed about it. He went into his consciousness, and what he realized was that every person he had studied that was incredibly successful had something in common. They all had mastermind groups that they worked with. Now, a mastermind can be one other person or it can be many people, anything in between. But he realized he was a lone wolf. He didn't have a mastermind that he brainstormed with. So I think he started masterminding with his wife initially, and he really began to realize the power of the mastermind. That's why I belong to LifeWorks University. We mastermind with each other, and it is an amazing experience to be with like-minded people and share ideas. And with Zoom, you can do it with people all over the world. But the devil began to speak to him, and it was a pretty interesting conversation because this devil began to tell him that it basically controlled 98% of the population of the world through fear. People have fear, which makes it very easy to take over their minds and paralyze them or keep them from doing what their purpose or their mission is. Fear of poverty is number one. Number two is fear of death. And in between, you've got fear of criticism, fear of ill health, fear of loss of love, and fear of old age. Now, if you can overcome these fears and free yourself, you're not controlled by this negative energy anymore, which holds you back and keeps you from really living the life of your dreams. And the devil went on to explain that his opposition is the good, positive energy that we call God, usually. Of course, there are many names for God, but he called it God in the book. And that positive energy includes things like love, faith, hope, optimism. All of the positive emotions are part of what the devil is not. And when people really start to operate in the more positive emotions and learn how to control their thought and get rid of those negative fear-driven thoughts, then the devil has no control and things start to happen, just as Napoleon Hill had figured out when he was listening to his other self, which was giving him positive guidance. Things worked out. But when he let the fear come in and he was frightful and fearful because of having gone through the Great Depression, wondering if his teachings that he had come up with for people to achieve success were only theory or if they were practical, really doubting whether or not he could make it work for himself, he realized that would paralyze him. So Napoleon was very good at having these inner conversations with himself. Now, if you read this chapter, you will learn that people who can think for themselves cannot be controlled by this evil, negative energy that you just need to be constantly aware of. Once you understand that you can think for yourself, you don't have to worry about it anymore. And that's freedom. Hi there, this is Rebecca Tripp talking about Outwitting the Devil again today. And this is chapter 4 called Drifting with the Devil. And this one is the eye-opener. This is where he explains why he could never publish this book while he was alive. He starts to really have a conversation with the devil. Now you can think of the devil as an energy, an entity. The devil explained in the previous chapter, he's not in physical form, but he is able to take over the minds of humans. Up to 98% of all the people on the planet can be controlled by this negative, fearful energy that seeps into the mind if you let it. The only people he cannot operate with are those who can think for themselves. And he explains how he takes over the minds of the masses of population. And he doesn't really want to share this information with Napoleon because he says he will lose millions of people that have been born and even those who have not been born yet if the secret gets out as to how he operates. But Napoleon insists on him confessing as to how he does it, because Napoleon's not afraid of the devil. He's found his other self. He's had this rebirth experience where he's stepped into his inner power, which is what I like to teach people, how to find your inner power. And because of that, he just wants the devil to explain to him how he manipulates all these people. And he goes on to do that with Napoleon, reluctantly, because he knows Napoleon is not going to publish this book. And this is the reason why. The devil explains that there are two major secret principles by which he gains control of the minds of humans. One of them is by working through all the authoritarian figures that humans come in contact with as soon as they're born. People like their teachers, their parents, all their relatives, even the towns they live in, the countries they live in, are all programmed to believe a certain way, to teach people how to conform, how to share the beliefs that they have, because it just seems natural to teach children your own belief systems, even though they may be based on false principles. We, like sponges, when we're little children, just pick up on everything around us, and we begin to take on the beliefs of those that have come before us and those that are teaching us. And that's how our minds get programmed. And there's a lot of fear involved. There's a lot of dumbing us down. There's a lot of keeping us under control. When you think about how the school systems operate, children are not necessarily taught how to find their burning desire when they're young, so that they can make plans for when they get older to pursue something that really sets them on fire. Many times they just have to take in all sorts of information that's irrelevant to their own liking or their own appetites, and sit there and absorb it. And it's teaching us how to not think for ourselves if we're put in that kind of environment. He also goes on to talk about how spiritual leaders who like to preach fire and brimstone and put the fear of God in people and make them think that there is a hell that they're going to go to if they're not obeying and living the way they think they should be living. And that fear can be the driving force that operates throughout a person's life, gives them anxiety, gives them stress, makes them always feel like they're not good enough or they're not doing the right thing. And it affects the mind in a way that you're unable to think clearly. And he gives a lot of really big examples about how he creates these drifters. And unfortunately, the majority of the population, he has said, 98% are drifters. And if you want to break out of this and realize that you can think for yourself, you need to do that work on yourself. And if you can figure out how to reprogram your subconscious mind, which is where everything that's running your life happens to reside, and there are techniques out there that you can plug into, you're going to be a lot happier, and you're going to be able to tap into other realms of consciousness where you can get the guidance that you need and live a much happier life. But as he explains in this book, if he had published it back in his day, the devil tells him, and he knows it because his wife tells him also, you cannot publish this book. It will ruin us. Napoleon realized that it would be banned from the classrooms. It would be put down by the churches. It would be criticized in book reviews because people don't want to know that they're being manipulated and programmed. It's too painful sometimes to try to figure out how to break out of that. So it wasn't published back in his day. It came out about 7 years ago when the family finally agreed to let it be published. But it will blow your mind to find out how this controlling, negative, nasty thinking that seems to run so many institutions and people that are living on this planet operates. It's a real eye-opener. Hi, this is Rebecca Tripp. Today I'm talking about the 5th chapter of this book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, called The Confession Continues. Right at the beginning of this chapter, Napoleon explains to the devil that he is not fearful of him because he has become the master of his destiny. He has found his other self, and because of that, he has overcome fear. And fear is the one thing that the devil is planting in everyone's mind in order to control them. And he has many ways that he does it. So Napoleon explains to the devil that his word will live on because it's the truth with a capital T, and that the devil's ideas and concepts will eventually fade away once people are onto him. And that's the whole point of Napoleon writing this book back in the 1930s. Even though he wasn't able to publish it back then, it's out there now. It came out in 2011. And he gets the devil to explain his subtle ways of manipulating people. One of his biggest tricks is flattery. He goes on to explain how most humans are very susceptible to flattery in one form or another. Example, men can seduce women by telling them they're beautiful or they look great. Women are able to seduce men. Men of great power fall to their demands when they know how to stroke their egos and tell them that they're incredible businessmen or they look fabulous. And he said really only 2 out of 100 men don't fall prey to these kinds of tactics. Flattery is also used in the spying business. The spies learn very easily how to flatter the people they're trying to get the proper information from in order to cause conflicts and wars even. Flattery is a very useful tool. Fear is propaganda. And propaganda is another way that the devil influences people. He's able to do it by putting out false information in the news. He can say things in advertising. He can say things from the pulpit. He can manipulate people in so many ways using propaganda, and they don't even realize that they're being manipulated. That's the interesting thing about propaganda. When you hear something over and over again, you begin to believe it, even though it could be very, very far from the truth. he has plans to turn America into a dictatorship, so he says in this confession. That's his goal, because once we have a dictatorship, people are very easily manipulated through propaganda. They have no choice. The devil can create run-on banks by using people's fearful consciousness in order to put them in a state where they think disaster's looming up ahead. He admits that he can create pandemics. How timely. So fear of the devil comes in many subtle forms. So Napoleon goes on to ask him, well, what about, people who achieve great wealth? Are they easily manipulated by you? And he said, oh, yes. Once people become very successful, many times he can use bribery in order to take over their minds. And Napoleon wants to know more details about that. So he explains how he can bribe them with food or sex, money, power over other people, control, drugs even, alcohol, gambling. The devil has many ways to control people. Failure is another way that the devil likes to control. There are many people who have incredible ideas. They invent things. They write books, or they want to write books. They want to bring their talent into the world, but they get that first taste of failure and they give up. And the devil realizes that failure is one of his biggest tools. But the ones that are the non-drifters realize that every failure brings with it the seed of success. And they never give up. Of course, Edison is one of the best examples. I mean, what did he do? 10,000 times he tried to invent the light bulb and never gave up. It's those who do not give up and work through every failure as a stepping stone to analyze it and realize that it's just redirection, or it's taking a look at things from a different point of view that will bring them the success they want. The non-drifter takes life on his own terms. The drifter takes whatever shows up. Example, a non-drifter may need financing for his business or what he wants to do, and he'll go to a bank and borrow the money, where a non-drifter might go to a pawn shop and pay horrendous interest rates in order to get the capital. They don't think as clearly as the non-drifter. Then he gets him to confess that there are 10 things that people can actually do to keep themselves from being drifters. One of them is to think for themselves, do their own thinking. The devil admits this. If you think for yourself, he can't touch you. You have to decide what you want and create a plan for it. If you don't have a plan of action, you just drift. You have to analyze every temporary defeat that comes along, take a look at it, figure out what you need to do to correct it, and use it as a stepping stone. You must be willing to render service to mankind. The more service you're giving, the bigger you'll be rewarded. You have to understand that your brain is like a receiving set. And when you learn how to function with it in the way that it was meant to be used, you can tap into this higher intelligence and get ideas, get guidance, come up with things that you never really would have thought of with your own experience, have inspirations, revelations, intuitions. It's an amazing tool. He also says that the greatest asset that a human has is time. We shouldn't waste it. He explains how fear can fill up the mind, and he loves to do this. He loves to fill the mind with fear. When something happens and we become fearful, we become paralyzed. We're unable to correct the problem properly because the fear takes over. And once we understand that it's just a state of mind and we start to fill our consciousness with those positive thoughts that push the fear aside, it nothingizes it, it overcomes it, then we become sovereign. He also teaches that if you know how to pray correctly, you'll get results. It's not about begging, it's about commanding. and expecting and living from the end result like it's already happened. And once you get that sort of mindset going on, then things start to happen. You can either be the master of life or life will master you. Devil goes on to explain. It takes work. You need to do that inner work in order to become a master. He also goes on to say that your dominating thoughts are what you attract into your experience daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. So if you work on creating dominating thoughts that are positive and filling your mind with positive ideas and the teachings of others that have gone before you, that are living even, that can be your mentors and your teachers, and you absorb material and information that is strictly positive, and you get rid of that negative stuff that's programming you, you'll be able to attract more into your experience that you desire. Willpower is very important. He goes on to ask the devil how someone can break this spell that he is able to cast on people where they become drifters, and if it is even possible to become a non-drifter. And the devil explains that yes, it is possible if you use your willpower to break the habit of drifting. But you must work on yourself. If you don't, and if you wait too long, you become like a spider caught in a spider web, unable to free yourself. So the choice is ours, whether we want to be drifters or non-drifters. Hi there, this is Rebecca Tripp. Today I'm talking about chapter 6 in the book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, called Hypnotic Rhythm. This is a very, very interesting chapter. He goes on to explain what hypnotic rhythm is. It's actually something operating here in this earthly plane, in this three-dimensional world, just like the law of gravity. It's always operating. And hypnotic rhythm can be seen in nature. When you look at nature, you have your seasons, you have apple trees producing apples, you have cherry trees producing cherries. Everything has a rhythm to it. Well, the same goes for our thinking. And our habits of thinking turn into hypnotic rhythms. And they can be good ones and not so good ones, depending on what we're holding uppermost in our thoughts. For instance, if you're a musician and you practice every day to become better and better, eventually you become an accomplished musician who just automatically, through habit, gets into a hypnotic rhythm that's able to produce beautiful music. But on the other hand, if you have negative habits that you're constantly, every day, implanting in your consciousness over and over again, a good one is fear of death. He says that's the number one thing that he uses to control people. Because people have this fear of death because it's the unknown. They don't know what to expect when they pass on. And he said that preachers are one of his most treasured allies as far as promoting the taking over of humans' minds when they get up and they preach about the devil, and he keeps it forefront in their minds. All they hear is the word devil, and they think about eternal hell, and they become fearful of what's going to happen to them after they pass on. And when you have fear in your mind, in your consciousness, it takes up a certain amount of space that doesn't allow you to become a free thinker, a non-drifter, because when that fear is eating away at you, you're trapped, like that spider in the web. He goes on to explain to Napoleon that if one person would come forward with the truth about how he operates and how they can break this spell of hypnotic rhythm by holding uppermost in their thoughts positive ideas, positive habits, positive programming, they would be able to change the world. It would just take one generation. But he also goes on to say that no one is going to come forward and do it because of fear of criticism. And he tells Napoleon, you're not even going to do it. You'll never publish this book because you know that it will ruin you. People will throw rocks at you. They'll criticize you. And his wife also tells him, there's no way you're going to publish this book while we're alive. And he doesn't. It didn't come out until 2011, many years after he died, because he knew what the ramifications would be. But once we begin to understand how this hypnotic rhythm is just part of being human, and we can use it for good or we can use it for evil, we can actually free ourselves. And whatever the uppermost thought, the main things that we're thinking about on a daily basis are, as long as they're positive and we turn to the positive side of life, the God side, we can keep ourselves free of this eternal oblivion that he talks about once we get caught up in this web of negativity. It's a really interesting chapter to dig into, and he really lays it out how you can become a non-drifter. Hi, this is Rebecca, and today I'm talking about chapter 7 in this book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. It's called Seeds of Fear. And he explains in this book how he uses some of our institutions, like our churches, in order to promote his agenda. Because churches are very good at it, trying to get people to worry and fear the devil. And, they're sometimes programming them to believe that if they're not a good person, they're going to go to hell after they die. And that can be a very, very frightful thing to a lot of people. So the devil explains how he wouldn't dream of getting rid of the churches because they actually work as his agents to promote his agenda. He also talks about how governments can cause depressions and manipulate people in a very negative way, create a lot of fear. So I think we're kind of seeing that today. There's an awful lot of fear going on the planet. And if you read this book, Outwitting the Devil, you'll figure out how you can free yourself from the fear. He explains that people who fill themselves with thoughts of opulence, power, success, happiness, joy, positive emotions are the people who attract into their experience possessions that they want, things that they want, experiences, careers, whatever. But the people who are thinking poverty, lack, depression, all the negative emotions, thinking that nothing good will ever happen, being very despondent, hopeless, they attract into their experience negative things. He explains that's why poor people like to congregate in the same kind of communities. Wealthy people wouldn't go live there. They live in other communities because we're like magnets. It attracts. We attract exactly what we're believing. He calls this hypnotic rhythm. Once we begin to understand that these are mental patterns that we build in our consciousness, and these rhythms, these hypnotic rhythms, are what we accept as our reality. When we begin to understand that we've been programmed to accept a certain reality for ourselves, and if we don't like it, we can change the hypnotic rhythm and begin to understand how we can use these success principles to do that. We can create a different kind of life for ourselves. We actually have the power within us to be the masters. And he goes on in the next chapters to explain exactly how to do that. Hi, this is Rebecca. Today I'm talking about chapter 8 in this book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, and it's called Definiteness of Purpose. In this chapter, he explains why you must have definiteness of purpose in order to achieve anything in this life. Without it, you're just drifting. Napoleon asks him if everyone is born with definiteness of purpose. And he explains they all have the potential for it. They can all definitely decide to take up something that gives them focus, But unfortunately, not unfortunately for the devil, but unfortunately for the other side, 98% of all the humans decide to be drifters. And that's because the devil can so easily work on them. And he explains some of the techniques in this chapter that are used by the force we call the devil, the negative energy. He goes on to explain that when you're born, you definitely have free will and you can pick and choose however you want to live your life, but we're programmed. And it's very difficult to fend off that programming because as little children, we start to imitate. We learn how to walk that way, we learn how to talk, we learn how to function as human beings. But not only do we take on the physical qualities of the people around us, but the mental ideals and things that they're thinking. And most people have a certain amount of fear built into their consciousness that we pick up on. And we begin to be fearful, which limits our ability to focus and have definiteness of purpose. Just like the negative emotions like anger, jealousy, frustration, misery, anything negative is also something that falls into that category of keeping us from living our true purpose and having definiteness of purpose, because it drains our energy. A house divided will fall. It cannot be thinking about fear and miserable things and focusing on positive, good things that we want to accomplish at the same time and get good results. We have to learn how to keep our minds focused on our definite purpose, even to the point where falling in love can be a detriment if we allow it to take us on a big detour and consume us to the point where we're not any longer thinking about our definite purpose. You know how that goes sometimes. You just get carried away. Well, that's not a good thing. So the people that succeed, the ones that are not drifters, have definiteness of purpose, and nothing can take them off course. Even when the obstacles come along, the failure comes along, which it always will, they just use that as a stepping stone to the next thing that they have to do to redirect themselves to stay on purpose and achieve what they want. Hi, this is Rebecca, and today I'm talking about chapter 9 in this amazing book, Outwitting the Devil, published by Napoleon Hill. Actually, he was long gone when it finally got published. But, you know, it's the most amazing book to read in these times that we're living in. I highly recommend it. Chapter 9 is called Education and Religion. And he starts to explain more about how the devil can control the minds of humans and turn them into drifters. Napoleon asks him in this chapter, what about people that have definiteness of purpose, which is one of the key elements to being a successful person? You must have definiteness of purpose in order to succeed at what you want to do with your life. And some people become very successful, but then they find out after they achieve their success that there are certain things that they don't like about their lives. You know, things come up that aren't quite aligned with their happiness. And the devil explains that people who have inner peace and happiness and joy within themselves find ways to get rid of the things that don't serve them anymore. That's all part of having definiteness of purpose. You're able to separate what you don't want in your life from what serves you. And you become even more on purpose with what you're doing. Then he asked the devil, what about married people that aren't really happy living together anymore? Does that detract them from their definite purpose? And the devil says, oh, yes. If you're living in a situation that is full of friction and discord, it takes you off your purpose because it depletes that energy. It creates the habit of drifting and indefiniteness because you're busy trying to solve that problem, right? Or find some peace. And as long as you're in a situation like that, you cannot be fully engaged in your definiteness of purpose. Then he asks, well, what about children? Do they have a duty, an obligation to their parents for having given birth to them and having them? Are they supposed to go along with everything their parents want them to do? No, says the devil. It's the other way around. The parents have an obligation to their children to give them as much knowledge as they can after they bring them into this world. But it's up to every single individual to find their own happiness, their own purpose, and their own definiteness of purpose. And he makes it very clear that happiness is something that is almost the first requirement to being an individual who can help other people on the planet, because once you've found a way to make yourself happy, then you can spread it and share it with other people and find ways to help other people along the way. Another thing he touches on in this chapter is prayer. And the devil explains why people get exactly what they're praying for, whether they understand it or not. Because when you desire something, you start praying for it. Many times it's when you've reached that point where you're desperate. You need a prayer to be answered. Something terrible may be happening in your life and you're praying, trying to pray your way out of it. Well, if you're fearful while you're praying, you're going to get what you're fearing. That's how prayer works. And he explains that Jesus was right. You know, ask as if you've already received it. And all the other great mystics have said the same thing. You need to feel the end result, feel like you've already gotten what you're praying for without any doubt or any fear. As long as there's fear left in your consciousness that you're not going to get it, it's not going to happen, it trips it up. It keeps it from happening. Affirmative prayer claims exactly what you want in a way that higher intelligence can find a way to bring it to you. And that's the other thing about this chapter. It's quite a long chapter. He goes into the different ways that the educational system could be turned around if we would start teaching children how to think for themselves instead of just pouring information into their heads. If they were learning how to actually think instead of what to think, we would have a whole different kind of civilization. And it's important that children be taught that there's always a solution. If you're a metaphysical person, you begin to understand this, that a problem never comes along in your life, and I don't care what it is, without a solution. But you need to know how to think in order to think about how to find the solution. And the chapter goes on to explain that when you have definiteness of purpose and you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish while you're here and you have a passion for it, you can tap into this higher intelligence that's always there for you to tap into in order to solve your problems and find the answers that you need. Hi, this is Rebecca. Today, chapter 10 from this book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, called Self-Discipline. That's the name of the chapter. And the author, Napoleon Hill, wants to know, how can we stay in this state of mind all the time where we have definiteness of purpose? You know, he's been explaining, if you don't want to be a drifter, you must have a definite purpose that you're going for. And you must be in that state all the time, no matter what's happening in the outer world. That's the overriding thing in your life, your purpose. But how do you stay in that state all the time in order to get the things done? The devil explains it in this chapter a little bit. He goes on to point out that there are three major areas where people mess up. The first one being their desire for food, believe it or not. When you're thinking about food a lot, you like to eat a lot, you don't care what it's doing to your body necessarily. You just like the taste. You like to maybe even be a glutton. That's not serving you, because it can affect your health very badly. He talks about how if you don't, get rid of toxic things that are sitting in your intestines, it is not good. It actually gives you a foggy mind where you can't think clearly. So it's very important to watch what you take in and not be a glutton. That's one of the key things to being a non-drifter. The next thing he talks about is your desire for sexual expression. If that's what you're thinking about all the time and you're not transmuting it, you can get messed up too. He mentions in his book that came out before this one called Think and Grow Rich, he has a whole chapter on sexual transmutation and how successful people have a very strong sex drive generally, and they're very charismatic. They have that energy, but they know how to transmute it and become magnetic leaders and speakers. It's that sexual energy that connects us to other people and makes people be drawn to us as leaders. So sexual energy is very key to success, but you have to know how to transmute it and not be a sex addict or thinking about it all the time. That's not going to serve you. The third thing he touches on is your desire to express loosely organized opinions. Now, if you're one of these people who always wants to say what's on your mind, no matter what other people are doing or thinking, that will not serve you very well. When you're just expressing loosely organized opinions and ideas all the time, people don't take you seriously. We've all seen those people that constantly call into the talk shows or constantly, write into the columns in the newspapers and express their opinions. Well, you have to be careful, because you can also turn off big chunks of people that don't want to be around you. And if you want to be a leader, that's not such a good thing. Napoleon even talks about how he wrote a letter to an editor one time and it cost him a very good job. He was sorry afterwards that he had done it. So having these loose opinions can turn us into grasshoppers, where he says, a grasshopper just likes to flip from one thing to the next, jumping around and never getting anything really done. That can be a problem. If you're just constantly shifting around all the time with your thoughts and your projects and not completing anything, you're going to be a drifter. You're not going to accomplish your goals. It's important to follow through. So then he asks the devil, if you have a really big problem and you really need a solution, where do you go? And the devil says, the only dependable power available to any human being is the power of their own thought. So once you begin to understand that all of the answers are within and you can rely on yourself to find the answer. He talks about higher intelligence. Once you learn how to tap into that, you've got it all, because you'll always get an answer if you need one. You'll learn how to go there and ask for guidance. So he really explains beautifully in this chapter how to become a non-drifter. And he refers back to those 7 principles that he's been talking about in this amazing book. If you follow those, you will not be a drifter. You will be one of the 2% who gets things done. And once you understand that the power of your thoughts and going within will free you from this hypnotic rhythm that most people are caught up in. We call it the mass consciousness, but there are different variations of it. You can be in a negative hypnotic rhythm, or you can be in a good one. But if you're in a negative one, you can feel like you're trapped and in prison. So if you want to free yourself and find the way out of this prison, read the book, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Hi, this is Rebecca, and today I'm talking about chapter 11 in this book by Napoleon Hill called Outwitting the Devil. This chapter is learning from adversity. Adversity and failure happen in this three-dimensional world. None of us escape it. But with every adversity and failure, it brings with it the seeds of opportunity. We just need to be able to see it. He talks once again about this hypnotic rhythm, which we can get into. Hypnotic rhythm can be very negative. It can be positive. It just depends on what the mass consciousness seems to be getting involved with. Right now, I feel like planet Earth has kind of slipped into a negative hypnotic rhythm, but you don't have to be part of the negativity of it if you don't choose to be. We all have the individual ability through our thoughts to pick and choose how we like to make things feel. And he also talks about failure and how it's man-made. That's all it is, man-made. So if we don't want to fail, all we have to do is figure out how to reverse that and become more successful. He gives us some tips in this chapter. One of them is that once you understand how this hypnotic rhythm works, you can consciously become more positive when you're dealing with people. If you want harmony in relationships, then you want to express yourself and feel positive toward other people as opposed to confrontational, negative, argumentative. That's not a good thing. He also talks about the sixth sense. Now, if you develop your sixth sense and you begin to understand that telepathy and spiritual sense, revelations, insights are real, more so than what we get from our five senses, you'll begin to be able to read people more accurately, understand where they're coming from, what their motivations are, and get along better with them in the long run because you'll be able to see things about them. And you can also use your sixth sense to tap into this higher intelligence that is always operating, that provides us with all the solutions we need. Our higher self is tuned into this higher intelligence. And once we learn to communicate with that through our sixth sense, we get the answers. There's always a solution and there's always an opportunity, which is the seed of adversity. You might even be fortunate enough to meet your other self. Once you meet your other self, which he's talked about before in this book, Napoleon met his other self, and he realized that this other self knew exactly what his purpose was, and it would guide him and move him in the right direction if he listened and allowed it to happen. So when you face great adversity, one of the biggest benefits many times is to meet your other self. And when you do that, you basically become free. You're not stressed out anymore. You're happy because you know, no matter what, you've got something to tune into that's going to bring you the solutions you need. So everyone is going to face adversity as long as they're in this three-dimensional world. No one is immune. But the thing to remember is that we all have the power of positive thought. And when it is sufficient, we can master all adversity and create benefits. And that's a given. Hi there, this is Rebecca. And today I'm talking about the very last chapter of this amazing book called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Chapter 12 is called Environment, Time, Harmony, and Caution. He touches on all of these subjects because they're very, very important to achieving success in life. The first one he touches on is your environment. And he talks about how your mental, spiritual, and physical influences are key to your success. If you're living in a certain environment, be it positive or negative, it's going to have an effect on the way you think, because we take on the characteristics of our environment, whether we like it or not. So if you're living in a situation that tends to be surrounded by negativity, it's going to be a lot harder for you to have positive mental thoughts. It's called harmonic rhythm. If you're surrounding yourself with positive people that want to do positive things and you're living in a community that's uplifting, you're going to find that your harmonic rhythm is going to be much higher, much more positive. So it's very important to pick and choose who you're living with. He goes on to talk about marriage and how that is the key number one relationship if you happen to be married, as far as your harmonic rhythm goes, because marriage brings in spiritual forces of such weight that you just can't escape it. Once you're living intimately with someone, you take on a lot of their mental vibrations and traits. So if you're stuck in a situation that you feel stressed out in, and you're not communicating the way you want to, you're going to tend to get into a negative harmonic rhythm and feel like you can't really live your purpose to its fullest because it'll drag you down. On the other hand, if you're in a positive relationship with someone that you're in harmony with, you can use it like a mastermind. It is a mastermind because when two or more people come together in a spirit of harmony, they can create amazing things. The energy is multiplied tenfold when two or more people come together. So he goes on to talk a lot about marriage in his books and how important it is to make sure you're married to the right person if you decide to get married. And then he talks about habits. Habits are created because of our desires. Whatever it is that we're desiring, day after day after day becomes a habit in our thought patterns. And it actually changes the cells in our brains to the point where we start attracting, it's like we're magnetized and we're going to attract exactly what that overriding thought is. The one that's uppermost in our mind is going to become predominant. And that's what will attract into our experience what we're thinking about all the time. So it's important to go within and take a good look at your thought process to see if that inner voice is positive or negative. Is it leading you in the right direction, the place you want to go, or is it holding you back? Then he talks about time. Time is key to developing wisdom because you're not born with wisdom. You develop it as you go through life and you have life experiences. You have to be a non-drifter, though, in order to achieve wisdom. It's not something that's handed to you. You have to desire it. If you're a drifter and you just go through life accepting everything that comes along without really taking a look at how it happened or why it happened or looking underneath the surface of it, you're not going to develop any wisdom. The non-drifters use life as a classroom. It's a learning experience where they can learn that when things don't work out the way they want them to, they just need to redirect themselves somehow and find the solution. A non-drifter knows there is always a solution because we all face adversity and failure in life. That's a given. In this three-dimensional world, it seems that's the way it's set up. It's challenging. But once we understand that we can use adversity to show us the opportunity that's always there, because the seed of opportunity is always in adversity, then it's a stepping stone and we grow from it and we develop wisdom that we can share with other people and use in our own experience in order to move ourselves ahead. Harmony is also very, very important. Even though we have adversity and failure, we're constantly seeking out harmony in relationships, in the colleagues that we work with, in our business associates. That's why it's important to find a mastermind of like-minded people that are in harmony with you so that you can help each other by working together to support each other and brainstorm in order to move yourselves ahead. That mastermind is one of the key things in all of his writings. You must have a burning desire and you must have a mastermind in order to be successful. You also need to be clever enough to be a little bit cautious and not always just be going headstrong into the next opportunity or situation without really thinking about the consequences. Non-drifters are people who cautiously make decisions about things sometimes, like who they're going to marry or who their business colleagues will be or what kind of work environment they want to be in. They don't just take whatever comes along. They think about it. They decide whether or not it's aligned with their purpose. And then it's easy to make decisions, but you don't just throw yourself into every situation. It's an amazing book. It's full of wisdom. It's very timely. It came out in 2011. He wrote it, you know, back in the 1930s when things weren't going very well with the economy. And maybe it's a good time to be reading it now because nothing has changed, basically. We find ourselves back in the same situation that they were in the 1930s when he wrote the book. So I highly recommend it.